The candle flames shook when Elena Reyes stepped into the great hall, and every eye in the room turned to watch her fall. She did not know yet that she was falling. She only knew that Damon would not look at her. The Blackwood pack had gathered for the bonding ceremony that had been promised to her since she was 15 years old. Silver ribbons hung from the rafters. The scent of white roses filled the air. Elena wore a pale gold dress that her mother had sewn by hand, and she had practiced her vows every night for a month, whispering them into her pillow until the words felt like her own heartbeat. She walked toward the raised platform, where Damon stood in his ceremonial coat, tall and broad-shouldered, the man she had loved since she was a girl chasing him through the training yards. But his jaw was tight. His eyes kept sliding toward the side door. Elena reached the steps. She lifted the hem of her dress to climb them. Then Damon raised his hand. "Stop," he said. The hall went silent so fast that Elena heard her own heartbeat slam against her ribs. She stood frozen on the second step, one hand still holding her dress, waiting for him to explain, waiting for this to be some kind of joke, some kind of test that pack alphas sometimes gave before a bonding. It was not a joke. The side door opened, and a woman walked in wearing red. Her hair was dark and glossy, her steps slow and certain, like she already owned the room. Elena recognized her, Marissa. She had arrived at Blackwood territory only 4 months earlier, introduced to the pack as Damon's cousin from a northern bloodline, a quiet woman who kept to herself and rarely spoke at gatherings. Now she was walking straight toward Damon with her chin lifted high. "I can't bond with you, Elena," Damon said, and his voice carried through the hall like a blade cutting cloth. "The wolf inside me has chosen someone else. I didn't ask for this. Fate decided it." A murmur rose from the crowd. Someone gasped. Elena felt her knees lock, felt the blood drain from her face, felt 3 years of promises turn to ash in front of 400 witnesses. "Fate," she repeated, and her voice cracked on the word. "Damon, we have been promised since childhood. You told my father you would never break your word." "I'm sorry." He did not sound sorry. He sounded relieved. "This is bigger than promises. Marissa is my true mate." Marissa reached his side and slid her hand into his, and she looked at Elena with an expression that was almost kind, almost apologetic. But underneath it, Elena saw something colder, something that did not match a woman who had supposedly just discovered she was fated to a man she barely knew. Elena had spent 3 years learning to read a room the way her mother taught her, watching hands and eyes and the small movements people could not control. And what she read now, standing on those steps in her gold dress, with her whole future collapsing around her, was that Marissa was not surprised at all. "You planned this," Elena said quietly, only for Damon to hear. "Don't make a scene," he answered, low and sharp. "Accept it with grace, Elena. It will be easier for you. Easier for him," she thought. Easier for him to erase 3 years of promises with one sentence about fate. The pack elders stepped forward before Elena could say another word. An older woman named Greta, who had trained Elena in Luna duties since she turned 16, would not meet her eyes now. A wolf named Corwin, one of Damon's senior guards, moved to Elena's side and gently took her arm, the way someone takes the arm of a person who is about to fall. "The title of Luna passes to Marissa, effective tonight," Greta announced to the hall, her voice steady, even though her hands trembled slightly at her sides. "Elena Reyes will surrender her training marks and any claim to Blackwood leadership." Surrender. As if she had done something wrong. As if loving a man faithfully for 3 years was a crime that needed punishment. Elena felt the hall spin. She looked at the faces around her, people she had grown up with, people whose children she had helped deliver during difficult births, people she had defended in pack councils when others wanted to punish them unfairly. Not one of them stepped forward to speak for her. Fear kept their mouths shut. An alpha's decision was law, and questioning it meant risking everything. "Take off the mark," Corwin said gently, nodding toward the small crescent tattoo on Elena's wrist, the training mark that showed she had once been in line to lead this pack. Elena looked down at her wrist. 3 years of early mornings, of learning healing herbs and pack law, and how to settle disputes between hot-tempered wolves. 3 years of loving a man who was now looking at another woman, like she was the answer to a question he had never actually asked. She did not cry. She refused to give them that. "I'll remove it myself," she said, and her voice came out steadier than she expected. She unclasped a small silver pin from her hair, the kind used in old pack rituals to mark a formal release, and pressed it against the tattoo the way she had been taught, letting the mark fade under the cold burn of silver. It hurt. It hurt more than she let herself show. When it was done, she straightened her spine and looked at Damon one last time. He was already looking at Marissa, his hand resting at the small of her back, a small, proud smile on his face, like he had just won something, instead of destroying someone. "You will regret this," Elena said, not as a threat, but as a simple statement of fact, the way a person might say that winter always follows autumn. Damon did not even turn his head. Elena walked out of the hall alone. No one followed her. No one offered comfort. The great wooden doors closed behind her with a heavy sound that echoed through the empty courtyard, and for the first time in her life, Elena Reyes stood outside the only home she had ever known, with nowhere to go. She walked to the small cottage near the training yards that she had shared with her father before his passing 2 years earlier. She packed only what she could carry: a traveling cloak, a hunting knife, dried food wrapped in cloth, a locket with her mother's picture inside, the only image she had left of a woman who died when Elena was 7. She did not take anything with Damon's name attached to it, not the jewelry he had given her, not the letters he had written when she visited neighboring packs for training. She left it all folded neatly on the small table, as if leaving a debt fully paid. By the time the moon rose high over the trees, Elena was already at the edge of Blackwood territory, standing at the boundary line marked by old stone pillars that her ancestors had placed centuries ago. Beyond that line was land she did not know, rogue territory. Unclaimed forest where wolves without a pack wandered and sometimes disappeared. She looked back once at the lights of Blackwood glowing warm and golden in the distance, at the home she had built her whole identity around, at the pack that had just erased her like a mistake in a letter. Then she turned forward, into the dark trees, and did not look back again. The forest at night was a different world. Elena had trained as a fighter alongside the pack's warriors, so she was not afraid of the dark itself. She was afraid of something harder to name, a hollow feeling that sat in her chest where her purpose used to live. For 3 years, every choice she made had been in service of becoming a good Luna. Every lesson, every sacrifice, every quiet moment of self-doubt, she pushed away, because Damon needed her strong. Now she had nothing to be strong for. She walked for hours, following deer trails and the sound of a distant stream, letting her wolf senses guide her more than her human mind, which kept circling back to the hall, to the moment Damon raised his hand and said stop, to the small, proud smile on his face when Marissa took his hand. Marissa. Something about that name sat wrong in Elena's memory, now that she examined it, without the fog of heartbreak clouding her judgment. She thought of the woman's calm entrance, her perfectly timed arrival, the way she never once looked surprised at being called a fated mate in front of 400 witnesses. Fated bonds were sudden and overwhelming. Everyone in every pack knew that. People stumbled. People gasped. People sometimes fainted from the intensity of the pull. Marissa had walked in like an actress hitting her mark on a stage. Elena filed the thought away. She had bigger problems now than proving a theory nobody would believe from a woman the pack had just discarded. Near dawn, exhaustion finally caught up with her. She found a hollow beneath the roots of an old oak tree, wide enough to shelter her from the wind, and she curled up inside it with her cloak wrapped tight around her shoulders. Sleep came slowly, interrupted by the memory of Damon's voice repeating stop, 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 until the word lost all meaning and became just a sound, sharp and final. She woke to the sound of rain. It came down heavy through the leaves, cold and relentless, soaking through her cloak within minutes. Elena crawled out from the tree roots and looked up at a gray sky that showed no sign of clearing. She had no pack territory to return to for shelter. She had no coin to buy a room at any of the small trading posts scattered through the region, since Blackwood elders had frozen any resources tied to her name the moment her title was stripped. She was, for the first time in her 23 years, completely alone in the world. Elena straightened her shoulders and began walking anyway. Self-pity would not keep her alive. Her father had taught her that lesson long before Damon ever did, back when he trained her to hunt in bad weather, and told her that a wolf who waited for perfect conditions would starve waiting. She walked through the rain for most of the day, crossing streams swollen with runoff, climbing over fallen trees, keeping her senses alert for other rogues who might see a lone woman as easy prey. Twice she caught the scent of unfamiliar wolves nearby and shifted her path to avoid them, staying downwind, moving quietly the way her training had taught her. By late afternoon, the rain had turned into a full storm. Thunder rolled across the sky in long, low growls, and lightning split the horizon in jagged white lines. Elena's cloak was soaked through, her boots heavy with mud, and her body shivered uncontrollably, despite the warmth her wolf blood usually provided. She needed shelter, real shelter, not another hollow tree that would flood within the hour. Through the sheets of rain, she spotted something in the distance. A wall, tall gray stones stretching along a ridge, the kind of boundary marker that only powerful packs could afford to build. Elena hesitated. Crossing into a claimed territory without permission was dangerous, especially as an unmarked rogue with no pack to vouch for her. But the storm was worsening, and the alternative was risking her life to exposure. She made her choice and pressed forward toward the wall, praying whoever ruled this land would show more mercy than the one she had just left behind. She did not yet know the name of the kingdom she was about to enter. She did not know that the wall belonged to the Ashbourne territory, ruled by a king whose reputation for coldness kept even seasoned warriors from testing his patience. She only knew that she needed to survive the night, and that whatever waited for her on the other side of that stone wall could not possibly be worse than what she had already survived at Blackwood. Elena climbed over a low section of the wall where old roots had cracked the stone, dropped down into unfamiliar territory, and kept walking through the storm, her chin lifted despite everything, because if there was one thing Damon's betrayal had not managed to take from her, it was her refusal to let the world see her break. Somewhere ahead, hidden by rain and darkness, a patrol of Ashbourne warriors caught her scent on the wind and began to move toward her, unaware that the woman they were about to capture would change the future of their kingdom forever. Elena did not run when she heard them coming. She had already run enough for one lifetime. She stood her ground at the edge of a small clearing, rain streaming down her face, and waited to see what this new world would decide to do with her. 3 wolves emerged from the tree line, shifting into human form as they approached, dressed in dark uniforms marked with a silver crest she did not recognize. Their leader, a broad man with a scar across his eyebrow, studied her carefully, taking in her soaked cloak, her exhausted posture, the faint bruises of grief still visible in the set of her jaw. "You're trespassing on Ashbourne land," he said, his voice hard but not cruel. "State your name and your business here." Elena lifted her chin, rain dripping from her lashes, and answered in a voice that did not shake despite everything the last 2 days had taken from her. "My name is Elena Reyes," she said, "and I have no pack, no title, and nothing left to lose. So you may as well take me to whoever rules this land, because I have nowhere else to go." The scarred warrior exchanged a glance with his companions. Something about her answer, so blunt and fearless despite her clearly desperate state, made him pause. He had escorted many rogues off Ashbourne land before, some begging, some threatening, some trying to bribe their way past the boundary. He had never met one who simply stated the truth and waited calmly for judgment. "Come with us," he finally said. "The king will decide what happens to you." Elena nodded once and followed them through the rain, her heartbeat steady despite the uncertainty ahead, because whatever waited for her inside those walls could not possibly hurt her more than the people she had once called family. The warriors walked Elena through a stretch of dense forest that gradually opened into cleared land, and even through the rain she could see the outline of a massive fortress rising ahead, its towers dark against the storm clouds. Torches burned along the walls despite the downpour, protected by deep stone alcoves, casting an orange glow across wet cobblestones. She had never seen a stronghold this large. Blackwood's main hall had always seemed impressive to her, but this place made it look like a modest farmhouse by comparison. Whoever ruled here commanded serious resources and serious respect. The scarred warrior, who introduced himself briefly as Finn, led her through an outer gate, where more guards stood watch despite the weather. They eyed Elena with open suspicion, hands resting near weapons at their belts, and she understood immediately that trust was not something given easily in this territory. "Wait here," Finn said, gesturing to a small stone alcove that offered some shelter from the rain. "I need to inform the king personally. A stranger crossing the boundary wall is not something reported through normal channels." Elena waited, shivering, water pooling around her boots, while Finn disappeared through a heavy wooden door. She used the moments alone to study her surroundings, cataloging exits and entrances out of old habit, the same habit her father had drilled into her since childhood. "Know your surroundings," he used to say. "A wolf who does not know her surroundings is already caught." When Finn returned, his expression had changed slightly, more careful, more formal. "The king will see you now," he said. "Follow me, and mind your manners. He does not tolerate disrespect, especially from strangers found trespassing on his land." Elena followed him through corridors lit by torchlight, past tapestries depicting battles she did not recognize, past guards who straightened at attention as they passed. The fortress felt different from Blackwood's halls, colder somehow, more disciplined, less warm. There were no flowers here, no soft touches that a woman's hand might add to a home. It felt like a place built entirely for strength, with little room left for comfort. Finn stopped before a set of tall double doors carved with the same silver crest she had seen on the guards' uniforms, a wolf standing atop a mountain peak. He knocked once, waited for a low voice to answer, and pushed the doors open. The room beyond was a private study, not a grand throne room as Elena had expected. Shelves of books lined the walls, and a fire crackled in a wide stone hearth, filling the space with warmth that Elena's soaked body desperately craved. Standing near the fire, his back turned toward the door, was a tall man in dark clothing, his shoulders broad and rigid with the kind of tension that suggested he rarely allowed himself to relax. He turned to face her, and Elena found herself briefly unable to speak. He was younger than she expected for someone with such a fearsome reputation, though his eyes held the weight of someone who had carried heavy responsibility for a long time. His hair was dark, cut short and practical. A faint scar ran along his jaw, the kind earned in real combat rather than training exercises. He studied her with an intensity that made Elena feel like he could see straight through her soaked cloak and exhausted posture to whatever truth lay underneath. "You crossed my boundary wall during a storm," he said, his voice deep and controlled. "Most rogues have more sense than that. Explain yourself." "I needed shelter," Elena answered honestly. There was no point in lying to a man who clearly valued directness. "I did not know whose land I was crossing when I climbed the wall. I only knew that staying outside would likely kill me before the night ended." "And before that?" the king asked, stepping closer, his gaze sharp and assessing. "A woman does not simply appear alone at a kingdom's boundary, with no pack and no explanation. What happened to you?" Elena hesitated. Speaking the truth meant reliving the humiliation of the previous night, standing on those steps while Damon tore her future apart in front of everyone she had ever trusted. But something about this man's directness demanded the same honesty in return. "I was rejected," she said simply. "By the alpha I was promised to since childhood. He chose another woman at our bonding ceremony, in front of the entire pack, and I was stripped of my title and cast out the same night." The king's expression did not change, but something in his eyes sharpened, like a hunter noticing a trail he had not expected to find. "What pack?" he asked. "Blackwood," Elena answered. "My name is Elena Reyes. I imagine the name means nothing to you." "It doesn't," the king admitted, "but Blackwood does. Your former alpha, Damon, has been making unusual moves lately. Alliances that don't quite make sense on paper." He studied her again, more carefully this time. "You may know something useful, whether you realize it or not." Elena felt a flicker of something she had not expected to feel again, so soon after her humiliation. Curiosity, purpose, a small thread of usefulness. In a world where nothing is as it seems, one hero will rise against the odds to face the ultimate challenge. Last night, in front of the entire pack, he announced she was his true mate instead, using the excuse of fate to justify breaking 3 years of promises. "I do not believe it was fate at all. I believe it was planned." The king was quiet for a long moment, studying the fire before turning back to her. "My name is Cain Ashbourne," he said finally. "I rule this territory, and I do not make a habit of trusting strangers, especially ones who arrive during a storm with convenient information about a neighboring alpha's questionable alliances." "I did not come here to offer information," Elena said, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. "I came here because I needed shelter from the rain. Whatever you decide to do with what I've told you is your own business. I have no stake left in Blackwood's politics. They made that very clear last night." Something shifted in Cain's expression, a flicker of respect that he quickly masked behind his usual composed control. "You're not begging," he observed. "Most people in your position would be begging by now, for shelter, for mercy, for a place to belong. You're standing there, like you still have somewhere else to go, even though we both know you don't." "Begging did not save my future last night," Elena said. "I doubt it would help me tonight either." Cain studied her for a long moment, and Elena held his gaze despite her exhaustion, despite the cold still clinging to her soaked clothes, despite everything that had happened in the last 2 days. She would not shrink from this man simply because he ruled a kingdom far larger than the one that had discarded her. "Take her to the guest quarters near the east wing," Cain finally said to Finn, who had been standing quietly near the door throughout the entire exchange. "Have someone bring dry clothes and food. She stays under guard until I decide what to do with her, but she is not to be treated as a prisoner. Is that understood?" "Understood, my lord," Finn answered, though his expression suggested this was an unusual order from a king known for his caution around strangers. "Thank you," Elena said quietly to Cain, surprised by the small kindness after the harshness of the previous night. "Don't thank me yet," Cain replied, turning back toward the fire. "I have not decided if you are useful, dangerous, or simply unlucky. That decision will take time, and until I make it, you remain a guest whose freedom has clear limits." Elena followed Finn out of the study, her mind spinning with everything that had happened since she crossed that boundary wall. She had expected punishment, or at best indifference. Instead, she had found a king who listened carefully, who noticed details others might dismiss, who seemed genuinely curious about the truth behind her story, rather than simply judging her for arriving uninvited. The guest quarters were modest but clean, a stark contrast to the luxurious rooms she had once expected to share with Damon as Luna. A simple bed with warm blankets, a small hearth already crackling with fire, dry clothes laid out on a chair, plain but well made. Elena changed quickly, grateful for the warmth after hours in the storm, and sat by the fire eating the bread and stew a young servant brought without a word. She thought about Cain Ashbourne as she ate, about the sharp intelligence in his eyes, about how quickly he had connected her story to something already troubling him about Blackwood's recent alliances. He was nothing like Damon. Where Damon had always sought comfort and easy paths, Cain seemed to carry the weight of constant vigilance, the burden of a king who trusted almost no one and questioned everything. Elena did not know yet how deeply her arrival would change the course of 2 kingdoms. She only knew, as she finally lay down to sleep in a warm bed for the first time in 2 days, that something about this strange fortress felt less like a prison and more like the first solid ground she had stood on since Damon raised his hand and said stop. Sleep came easier that night, though her dreams were still haunted by the golden lights of Blackwood fading into darkness behind her. When she woke the next morning to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows, Elena allowed herself, for the first time since her humiliation, a small, fragile feeling that had nothing to do with grief. She felt, quietly and cautiously, like she might have found somewhere worth staying. 3 days passed before Cain summoned Elena again, and in that time, she learned more about Ashbourne territory than she expected to learn about any kingdom in such a short span. The servants who brought her meals were polite, but reserved, careful with their words, in a way that told Elena information was a currency carefully guarded within these walls. The guards who stood watch outside her quarters changed shifts with military precision, never lingering, never chatting, always alert. She spent her days observing, since there was little else to do while confined to the guest wing. She watched the rhythm of the fortress through her window, the training yards where warriors drilled from dawn until midday, The healers' quarters, where wounded fighters were tended with quiet efficiency, the kitchens that operated like a well-organized army rather than a simple household. Everything about Ashbourne territory ran with discipline. Nothing here felt soft or careless. It was the opposite of Blackwood in almost every way, and Elena found herself, despite her circumstances, oddly comforted by the order of it all. On the third evening, Finn arrived at her door with a message. The king wished to see her in his study once again. Elena straightened the borrowed dress a servant had provided, a simple deep blue gown, far less elaborate than anything she had worn as Luna in training, and followed Finn through the same corridors she had walked days earlier. Her nerves surprised her. She had faced down an entire pack's judgment without flinching, yet something about facing Cain Ashbourne again made her stomach tighten with uncertainty. When she entered his study, Cain was seated behind a heavy wooden desk covered in maps and letters, his expression unreadable as he studied a document in his hand. He gestured for her to sit in the chair across from him without looking up immediately, and Elena settled into it, folding her hands in her lap, waiting. "I sent inquiries to several sources about your former pack," Cain said finally, setting the document down and meeting her eyes. "Your story checks out. Damon rejected you publicly and replaced you with a woman named Marissa, claiming a fated bond discovered rather suddenly, given the timing of certain political developments." "What developments?" Elena asked, leaning forward slightly despite herself. Cain studied her for a moment, as if deciding how much to reveal. "Marissa is not Damon's cousin," he said. "She is the daughter of Alpha Ridgeback of the Thornfield Pack, a territory that has long sought stronger ties with Blackwood's resources and land. My sources suggest an alliance was being negotiated for months before your bonding ceremony, one that required Damon to abandon his existing commitment without appearing to simply choose politics over promises." Elena felt something settle in her chest, a confirmation of the suspicion she had carried since watching Marissa walk into that hall with such practiced calm. "So the fate story was invented," Elena said quietly, "a convenient excuse to dissolve a promise without admitting the truth." "It appears so," Cain confirmed. "Fated bonds are difficult to fake convincingly, but not impossible for a pack desperate enough to manufacture political convenience. Elders skilled in old rituals can sometimes create the appearance of a bond strong enough to fool most wolves, especially in a public setting where emotions run high and skepticism is rare." Elena sat back in her chair, processing the weight of what he had just confirmed. She had suspected manipulation from the moment Marissa entered that hall without a flicker of surprise on her face, but hearing it confirmed by someone with real intelligence networks made the betrayal feel sharper somehow, more deliberate, less like fate's cruel randomness, and more like a calculated cruelty disguised as destiny. "Why does this matter to you?" Elena asked, studying Cain carefully. "You rule a separate kingdom entirely. Blackwood's internal politics should mean nothing to Ashbourne territory." "Because Thornfield has been quietly expanding its influence for years," Cain answered, his jaw tightening slightly. "An alliance between Blackwood and Thornfield changes the balance of power in this entire region. It puts pressure on smaller territories along our shared borders, territories that Ashbourne has protected through careful diplomacy for over a decade. Your rejection was not simply personal cruelty, Elena. It was a calculated move in a larger political game, and you happened to be the price paid for it." Elena absorbed this information slowly, feeling the shape of her own heartbreak shift into something larger, something that extended far beyond her own personal humiliation. She had not been rejected because she was inadequate. She had been discarded because she was inconvenient to a political arrangement that mattered more to Damon than 3 years of genuine promises. Somehow, knowing this made the pain both worse and strangely easier to carry. Worse, because it confirmed that Damon had never truly valued her at all, not even enough to be honest about his reasons. Easier, because it meant the rejection had nothing to do with her own worth, and everything to do with a game she had never been allowed to play. "What happens now?" Elena asked, meeting Cain's steady gaze. "You have your information. I assume I've served whatever purpose you needed me for." "Not quite," Cain said, leaning back in his chair, studying her with an expression she could not quite read. "I have a proposal for you, Elena Reyes. One I think you will find more valuable than simply confirming political suspicions." Elena tilted her head, curiosity overtaking her caution. I'm listening. You have training as a Luna, Kane said. Healing knowledge, diplomatic experience, pack law, conflict resolution. Skills that took you 3 years to develop, and that Blackwood threw away without a second thought. Ashbourne territory could use someone with those skills, particularly someone who understands Blackwood's internal structure and Thornfield's ambitions firsthand. You're offering me employment, Elena said slowly, trying to understand the full shape of what he meant. I'm offering you a place, Kane corrected. Not as a prisoner, not as a servant, but as someone with genuine value to this kingdom. You would work alongside my healers and advisors, contributing your knowledge, earning your keep through skill rather than charity. What you make of that opportunity would be entirely up to you. Elena studied him carefully, searching for hidden motives, for the kind of manipulation she had just learned Damon and his elders were capable of. But Kane's expression held none of the practiced smoothness Marissa had shown that night in the hall. His offer felt blunt and honest, the way everything about him had felt since the moment she first stood soaked and exhausted in his study. Why would you do this? Elena asked. You barely know me. I could be lying about everything. I could be a spy sent by Damon himself to gather information on your kingdom. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched the corner of Kane's mouth, the first genuine expression of amusement she had seen from him. If you were a spy, he said, you would have tried much harder to please me by now, instead of questioning my judgment at every opportunity. Spies rarely challenge the person they're trying to manipulate. Elena felt a small, unexpected laugh escape her, the first genuine laugh she had allowed herself since the night of her rejection. It surprised her how good it felt, how it loosened something tight in her chest that had been clenched for days. I accept, she said, meeting his eyes steadily. Not out of desperation, though I won't pretend I have many other options right now. I accept, because it sounds like honest work, and honest work is something I haven't been offered in longer than I care to admit. Kane nodded once, satisfied, and rose from his desk to extend his hand toward her, a formal gesture Elena had not expected from a king known for his cold reputation. Welcome to Ashbourne territory, Elena Reyes, he said as she shook his hand, his grip firm and steady. Prove your worth here, and you will find this kingdom values loyalty and skill far more than empty titles ever could. Elena left his study that evening with a purpose she had not felt since before her humiliation, a small flame of determination rekindling in her chest. She did not know yet how deeply her path would intertwine with Kane Ashbourne's future, or how thoroughly Damon and Marissa's carefully constructed lie would eventually collapse under its own weight. She only knew that for the first time since that terrible night in the Great Hall, she had somewhere real to stand, and something real to build. Walking back to her quarters, Elena passed through the training yards where warriors still practiced, despite the late hour, their movements sharp and disciplined under torchlight. She paused to watch them, remembering her own training years at Blackwood, the early mornings, and aching muscles that had once felt like preparation for a future that never arrived. Perhaps, she thought, that future had simply been waiting for her somewhere else all along. She did not sleep easily that night, her mind turning over everything Kane had told her, the political weight behind her personal betrayal, the strange comfort she found in his blunt honesty after months of Damon's practiced charm hiding calculated cruelty. But when sleep finally came, her dreams were quieter than they had been in days, filled not with the golden lights of Blackwood fading into darkness, but with the steady orange glow of Ashbourne's torches, lighting a path forward she had not expected to find. Weeks passed, and Elena settled into a rhythm at Ashbourne territory that felt more purposeful than anything she had experienced in her final months at Blackwood. She rose early each morning, working alongside the kingdom's head healer, a sharp-tongued woman named Odette, who had little patience for laziness, but immense respect for genuine skill. Elena's knowledge of herbal remedies and wound care, learned during her years of Luna training, proved more valuable than she had expected, and within 2 weeks, Odette had stopped questioning her methods and started asking for her opinion instead. In the afternoons, Elena assisted with diplomatic correspondence, her understanding of pack law and negotiation tactics, giving her a useful perspective when Kane's advisors debated how to respond to shifting alliances among neighboring territories. She sat quietly during these meetings at first, listening more than speaking, learning the personalities and priorities of the men and women who helped Cain govern his kingdom. Gradually, she began to speak up. "Thornfield will not risk open conflict yet," Elena said, during one such meeting, when a heated debate broke out among Cain's advisors about how aggressively to respond to reports of Thornfield scouts near the eastern border. They just secured an alliance with Blackwood through Marissa's placement. They need time to consolidate that advantage before risking a war on two fronts. The room fell silent for a moment, several advisors exchanging surprised glances. Cain, seated at the head of the table, studied Elena with an expression that had become increasingly familiar over the past weeks, a kind of quiet, assessing respect that he rarely showed so openly to anyone. "Explain your reasoning," he said. "Blackwood's resources are strong but not limitless," Elena continued, feeling more confident now that she had the room's attention. "Damon inherited a stable pack, not a battle-hardened one. His warriors train well, but they haven't fought a serious conflict in over a decade. Thornfield knows this. They'll use the alliance to build strength quietly, expand trade routes, maybe pressure smaller territories along your shared border through economic means, rather than open aggression, at least for the next year or two." Cain nodded slowly, and one of his senior advisors, an older man named Halden who had served the Ashbourne family for over 20 years, leaned forward with interest. "She has a point, my lord," Halden said. "It would explain the pattern of scouts we've observed, testing boundaries rather than preparing for invasion." The meeting continued with renewed energy, and Elena felt something warm settle in her chest as she watched her insight shape the direction of the kingdom's strategy. This was what she had trained for during those 3 years at Blackwood, this exact kind of contribution, and it had taken losing everything to finally find a place where her voice actually mattered. After the meeting ended, Cain lingered near the door as the other advisors filed out, and Elena found herself alone with him for the first time in days. "You've become invaluable to this council faster than I expected," Cain said, his tone carrying genuine acknowledgement rather than simple politeness. "Halden does not compliment anyone easily. He's been advising my family since before I was born." "I only stated what seemed obvious to me," Elena said, though a small flush of pride warmed her cheeks at the praise. "Obvious things are often the hardest to see clearly when you're too close to a situation," Cain replied. "You bring perspective this council has lacked, precisely because you understand Blackwood's internal weaknesses firsthand. That knowledge is worth more than you realize." Elena studied him for a moment, noticing the way the torchlight softened the usual sharp lines of his expression, the small signs of exhaustion beneath his composed exterior that came from carrying a kingdom's weight on his shoulders every single day. "You work too hard," she said before she could stop herself. "I've watched you attend every council meeting, review every report personally, train with your warriors in the mornings before anyone else arrives. When do you rest?" A flicker of surprise crossed Cain's face, as if no one had asked him that question in a very long time. "Rest is a luxury kings rarely afford themselves," he said. "My father believed vigilance was the price of peace. He taught me the same lesson before he passed the crown to me sooner than either of us expected." "What happened to him?" Elena asked gently, sensing there was more weight behind his words than he usually allowed himself to show. Cain was quiet for a moment, his jaw tightening slightly. "He was killed during a border dispute with a territory that no longer exists," he said finally. "I was 22. I inherited this crown during a crisis, with enemies circling, and a kingdom uncertain whether I could hold what my father had built. I learned quickly that trust given too easily gets people killed." Elena felt a pang of sympathy she had not expected, understanding suddenly why Cain carried himself with such careful, guarded strength. He had not been born cold. He had been forged into vigilance by loss and necessity, much the way her own recent heartbreak had forged something harder and more determined within herself. "That's why you were so cautious with me," she said quietly. "Not cruelty, experience." "Yes," Cain admitted. "I've learned that people rarely arrive at my boundary wall without some hidden purpose. You were the first exception I've encountered in a long time." The moment stretched between them, quiet and unexpectedly intimate, and Elena felt something shift in her chest that she was not entirely ready to name. She had spent 3 years convincing herself she loved Damon, only to discover that love had been built on convenient assumptions rather than genuine understanding. This felt different somehow, this slow accumulation of honest conversations and mutual respect, built through weeks of watching each other's true character reveal itself under pressure. "Thank you," Elena said finally, "for trusting me enough to explain that." Kane held her gaze for a long moment, before nodding once, a small acknowledgement that seemed to cost him something significant to offer. "Get some rest, Elena," he said, his voice softer than she had heard it before. "Tomorrow's council meeting will likely be just as demanding as today's." Elena returned to her quarters that night with her mind full of new understanding, not just about Kane's guarded nature, but about her own gradually shifting feelings. She had arrived at Ashbourne territory broken and purposeless, expecting nothing more than temporary shelter from a storm. Instead, she had found genuine purpose, growing respect from people whose opinions actually mattered, and a strange, unexpected connection with a king who understood loss and vigilance in ways that made him feel less like a stranger and more like someone she was slowly beginning to understand on a deeper level. Over the following days, Elena continued proving her worth throughout the kingdom, earning trust not through empty flattery, but through consistent competence and genuine care for the people around her. She helped Odette develop a new treatment protocol for a fever that had been spreading through the eastern villages, spending long nights researching old healing texts, until she found a combination of herbs that finally broke the illness's grip on the sick. She helped settle a dispute between two warrior captains competing for the same promotion, using diplomatic skills honed during her Luna training to find a solution that satisfied both men without favoring either unfairly. Word spread through the fortress that the rogue woman Kane had taken in was proving herself far more valuable than anyone initially expected, and gradually, the guarded suspicion Elena had first encountered from Ashbourne's people began softening into genuine respect. Even Finn, the scarred warrior who had first captured her at the boundary wall, began seeking her out for casual conversation during mealtimes, his initial wariness replaced by easy friendship. "You've changed since that first night," Finn observed one evening as they shared a meal in the common hall, torchlight flickering warmly overhead. "You walked in here looking like someone who had lost everything. Now you walk through these halls like you actually belong here." "I think I'm starting to," Elena admitted, surprised by how true the words felt as she spoke them. "This place feels different from what I knew before. People here earn respect through their actions, not through titles handed to them by circumstance." "That's Kane's doing," Finn said, glancing toward the head table where the king sat reviewing reports even during mealtime, unable to fully set aside his responsibilities even for a moment's rest. "He built this kingdom on that principle after his father died. He doesn't trust titles or bloodlines the way most rulers do. He trusts what people prove through their actions, day after day." Elena watched Kane across the hall, noticing the small furrow of concentration between his brows as he read through whatever report currently demanded his attention, and felt that unexpected warmth stirring in her chest again. She pushed the feeling aside carefully, unwilling to rush into anything resembling romantic attachment so soon after Damon's betrayal had taught her exactly how dangerous misplaced trust could be. But even as she told herself to be cautious, some part of her recognized that what she was building here, this growing foundation of mutual respect and honest understanding, felt entirely different from anything she had shared with Damon during their 3 years together. It felt real, in a way that made her cautiously, quietly hopeful about a future she had never expected to find. Little did she know that far beyond Ashbourne's protective walls, whispers were already beginning to spread through Blackwood territory, whispers that would soon unravel the careful lie Damon and Marissa had constructed, and bring the full weight of political consequences crashing down upon the very alliance that had cost Elena everything she once believed she wanted. The first crack in Blackwood's carefully constructed lie appeared almost by accident, nearly a month after Elena's arrival at Ashbourne territory. A trader passing through Ashbourne's marketplace mentioned, almost as casual gossip, that Blackwood's new Luna had been seen arguing bitterly with her supposed father, Alpha Ridgeback of Thornfield, during a private meeting that several servants had accidentally overheard. The trader had no idea the significance of what he shared. He simply enjoyed passing along interesting stories from his travels, the way traders often did to earn extra coin or favor from curious innkeepers. But one of Kane's intelligence gatherers happened to be present in that same marketplace, and within hours the information had reached Kane's council chamber. Ridgeback and Marissa argued about the timeline of the alliance, Halden reported during the evening council meeting, reading from notes he had gathered from multiple sources. Apparently Marissa wanted more time before revealing the true nature of the arrangement to Blackwood's pack, fearing the political backlash if the truth emerged too soon. Ridgeback insisted the timeline could not be delayed, citing pressure from other allies who expected results. Elena leaned forward, her pulse quickening at the confirmation of everything she had suspected since that terrible night in the Great Hall. "This means Marissa knew from the beginning that the bonding was fabricated," she said. "She wasn't simply a pawn in her father's political game. She was an active participant in deceiving an entire pack, including the man she claimed to be fated to." "It also means the arrangement is fragile," Kane observed, studying the report Halden had passed to him. "If Marissa herself had doubts about the timeline, there may be others within Thornfield, or even Blackwood, who share similar reservations. Fragile alliances built on lies rarely survive long once cracks begin to show." Elena thought about Damon, about the proud smile he had worn as he took Marissa's hand in front of the entire pack, and wondered how much of that confidence had been genuine versus performed for an audience desperate to believe in fate rather than political calculation. "What do we do with this information?" Elena asked, looking around the table at Kane's advisors. "Nothing, for now," Kane said, surprising several people in the room. "We continue gathering information quietly. If Blackwood's alliance with Thornfield is going to collapse under its own contradictions, it will do so more thoroughly if we do not interfere directly. Direct interference gives them an external enemy to unite against. Patience gives their own lies time to unravel from within." Elena admired the wisdom in his approach, understanding that Kane's restraint came not from weakness, but from a deeper strategic patience that many rulers lacked. He was playing a longer game than simple revenge, and despite the part of her that still ached from Damon's public humiliation, she recognized the value in allowing consequences to unfold naturally, rather than forcing them prematurely. Over the following weeks, more fragments of information trickled into Ashbourne territory through various channels. A merchant reported that Blackwood's pack elders had grown increasingly nervous about maintaining the fiction of a fated bond, since several sharp-eyed pack members had begun questioning why Marissa showed none of the typical physical symptoms associated with genuine fated pairs. A traveling healer mentioned treating a Blackwood warrior for injuries sustained during what he vaguely described as internal pack tension, though he refused to elaborate further, out of loyalty to his patient. Elena found herself growing more confident with each passing week, her role within Ashbourne's council solidifying into something that felt less like temporary refuge and more like genuine belonging. She began sitting closer to Kane during meetings, their working relationship deepening into something built on mutual respect that occasionally, in quiet, unguarded moments, felt like something warmer still. One evening, several weeks after the trader's initial gossip reached Ashbourne's walls, Elena found herself walking alone through the fortress gardens after a particularly long council session. The gardens were modest compared to what she remembered from Blackwood, practical rather than decorative, but she had grown fond of the quiet space where she could think clearly away from the constant demands of her new responsibilities. She was surprised to find Kane already there, seated on a stone bench near a small fountain, his expression thoughtful as he watched the water catch the last light of sunset. "I didn't expect to find you here," Elena said, approaching cautiously. "I thought you'd still be reviewing reports." "Even kings need occasional moments away from reports," Kane replied, gesturing for her to join him on the bench. She hesitated only briefly before sitting beside him, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his presence despite the cooling evening air. "You seem different tonight," Elena observed, studying the tension in his shoulders. "More burdened than usual." Kane was quiet for a moment before answering. "Halden received word today that Thornfield is pressuring Blackwood to formalize their alliance through a public treaty within the next 2 months. It seems Ridgeback wants to secure the arrangement before any more cracks appear in Marissa's story." "That's sooner than expected," Elena said, frowning slightly. "What does that mean for Ashbourne?" "It means we may need to decide soon how directly involved we want to become in exposing the truth," Kane said, turning to look at her directly. A formal treaty between Blackwood and Thornfield would significantly shift the regional balance of power, particularly along our shared borders. I cannot simply wait indefinitely for their lies to collapse if the timeline is accelerating. Elena considered this carefully, feeling the weight of the decision, even though it was not truly hers to make. "What are you considering?" "Several options," Kane admitted. "None of them simple. I could send a formal inquiry to Blackwood's elders, questioning the legitimacy of the bond directly, though that risks appearing as unwarranted interference in another pact's internal affairs. I could quietly share what we know with other neighboring territories who might have their own reasons to question the alliance. Or I could wait and trust that the truth, once it fully emerges, will be damaging enough on its own without my direct involvement." "What would you do if this were purely a political calculation, without any connection to me?" Elena asked, genuinely curious about his reasoning. Kane studied her for a long moment before answering. "Honestly, I would likely choose patience regardless of any personal connection," he said. "Forced revelations rarely land as convincingly as truths that surface naturally through their own weight. But I won't pretend your presence here hasn't made this situation feel more personal than a typical political calculation." Elena felt her heart quicken at his words, at the careful honesty behind them. "Because I gave you useful information?" she asked, though some part of her hoped for a different answer entirely. "Because watching what that pack did to you, without any apparent guilt or hesitation, makes me want them held accountable for more than simple political miscalculation," Kane said quietly. "You did not deserve what happened to you, Elena. No amount of political convenience justifies discarding someone the way Damon discarded you." The sincerity in his voice caught Elena off guard, and she found herself unexpectedly moved by the genuine anger simmering beneath his carefully controlled exterior. This was not simple strategic interest. This was something closer to protective conviction, and it stirred something deep within her chest that she had been carefully guarding since her arrival. "Thank you," she said softly, "for seeing it that way. Most people I've encountered since that night have treated my rejection as either scandalous gossip or a political curiosity. You're the first person who's simply called it what it was: cruelty." "It was cruelty," Kane confirmed, his eyes steady on hers, dressed up in the language of fate to make it more palatable to witnesses who might otherwise have objected. "But cruelty regardless, and cruelty that will eventually face its own consequences." They sat together in comfortable silence for several minutes, watching the last light fade from the sky, and Elena felt something settle within her that had been unsettled since that terrible night in Blackwood's great hall. Not closure exactly, since the wound of Damon's betrayal had not fully healed, but something adjacent to it. A recognition that her worth had never actually depended on Damon's judgment, and that somewhere in the process of rebuilding her life at Ashbourne, she had found people who valued her for reasons that had nothing to do with convenient political arrangements. "I should return to my quarters," Elena said eventually, though she found herself reluctant to end the quiet moment between them. "Tomorrow's council session will likely require significant preparation, given this new information about Thornfield's timeline." "Of course," Kane said, rising alongside her. As they walked back toward the fortress together, he glanced at her with an expression she had not seen from him before, something softer beneath his usual composed authority. "Elena," he said, stopping just outside the entrance to the east wing, "I want you to know that whatever happens with Blackwood and Thornfield, your place here at Ashbourne does not depend on the usefulness of your political insight. You've earned genuine respect within this kingdom through your character alone." Elena felt warmth spread through her chest at his words, a warmth that had nothing to do with strategic alliances or political calculations. "That means more to me than you probably realize," she said honestly. "Good night, Kane." "Good night, Elena," he replied, and something in the way he said her name lingered with her long after she returned to her quarters, long after she settled into bed and closed her eyes, carrying with her the growing certainty that whatever was developing between herself and the Alpha King of Ashbourne was becoming far more significant than either of them had initially intended to allow. 2 more months passed, and the changes in Elena's life at Ashbourne territory became undeniable. Even to herself, she no longer thought of the fortress as temporary shelter or a place to simply prove her usefulness. She thought of it as home, in a way that Blackwood had stopped feeling like home long before Damon ever raised his hand and said stop. Her responsibilities had grown steadily. Odette now trusted her enough to lead the healing quarters during her own absences, and Kane's advisors regularly sought her perspective on matters involving neighboring packs and political strategy. She had earned a genuine place within Ashbourne's leadership structure, not through inherited title or promised bonds, but through demonstrated competence and unwavering integrity that the kingdom's people had come to respect deeply. Her relationship with Kane had also continued deepening, though neither of them had spoken openly about the growing attraction that had settled quietly between them over the months. They shared meals together frequently now, not always tied to official council business. They walked through the gardens in the evenings, when both their schedules allowed, discussing everything from kingdom politics to childhood memories, from Elena's years of Luna training to Kane's complicated relationship with the crown he had inherited far too young. Elena found herself looking forward to these moments more than she cared to admit, treasuring the easy comfort that had grown between them, so different from the performative romance she had once mistaken for genuine connection with Damon. It was during one such evening walk that news arrived which would finally begin unraveling Blackwood's carefully constructed deception. Finn approached them in the garden with unusual urgency, his expression serious, despite the peaceful evening around them. "My lord," he said, addressing Kane directly, "reports have arrived from our contacts within Blackwood territory. There's been a significant incident involving the Pax Luna." Kane's expression sharpened immediately. "What kind of incident?" "Marissa collapsed during a public pack gathering 3 days ago," Finn explained. "Witnesses reported she appeared to be in severe distress, and several pack healers were unable to identify the cause. More concerning, several senior pack members who witnessed the collapse have begun openly questioning whether her bond with Damon was ever genuine, since true fated mates typically show physical symptoms of connection that Marissa has apparently never displayed, even months into their supposed bonding." Elena felt her pulse quicken, remembering her own suspicions from that terrible night, suspicions that Kane had already confirmed through his intelligence networks weeks earlier. "What caused her collapse?" Kane asked. "That's the interesting part," Finn continued. "Rumors suggest it may have been triggered by an argument with Alpha Ridgeback, who arrived unexpectedly to discuss accelerating the formal treaty timeline. Several servants reported hearing raised voices before Marissa's collapse, including accusations that she had failed to properly secure her position within Blackwood's pack structure." "She's cracking under the pressure," Elena said quietly, understanding immediately what this meant. Maintaining a fabricated bond for months, especially under increasing scrutiny from pack members who are starting to notice the inconsistencies, would create tremendous psychological strain. "There's more," Finn added. "One of the pack's senior healers, a woman I believe you know personally, Elena, has apparently begun raising concerns directly with Damon about the legitimacy of Marissa's position as Luna." Elena's breath caught. "Greta," she said softly, remembering the woman who had trained her for 3 years, before ultimately failing to defend her during that terrible ceremony. "Yes," Finn confirmed. "According to our sources, Greta has been quietly gathering testimony from other pack members who witnessed the original bonding ceremony, comparing notes on the absence of typical fated bond symptoms. She has not gone public with her concerns yet, but the fact that she's investigating it all suggests significant doubt is spreading even among Blackwood's own leadership." Kane turned to Elena, his expression thoughtful. "This changes our calculations," he said. "If internal doubt is already spreading within Blackwood's leadership, direct intervention from us becomes less necessary and potentially counterproductive. Their own structure may collapse the deception more effectively than any external pressure we could apply." Elena nodded slowly, processing the news with a complicated mixture of emotions. Part of her felt a fierce satisfaction at hearing that Marissa was struggling under the weight of maintaining her lie, that Greta's belated investigation might finally expose the truth Elena herself had recognized months earlier. But another part of her felt strangely disconnected from the drama entirely, as if it belonged to a previous version of herself who no longer existed. "I find I don't feel the vindication I expected to feel," Elena admitted, surprising herself with the honesty of the confession. "I thought if this moment ever came, I would feel triumphant. Instead, I mostly feel like I'm hearing news about strangers." Kane studied her carefully, understanding dawning in his expression. Because you've built something new here, he said. Something that matters more to you now than settling old scores with people who never deserved your loyalty in the first place. Yes, Elena said, realizing the truth of his words as she spoke them. I spent so long defining myself by my place within Blackwood, by my promised bond with Damon, that I forgot I could build an entirely different identity somewhere else, somewhere that actually values what I bring to it. You've built that identity remarkably well, Kane said, his voice softening in a way that made Elena's heart skip. This kingdom is fortunate to have you, Elena. I hope you know that. Finn, sensing the private nature the conversation had taken, excused himself quietly, leaving Elena and Kane alone once again in the garden's fading evening light. There's something I've wanted to say to you for weeks now, Kane said, turning to face her fully, his expression more open and unguarded than she had ever seen it. I've hesitated because I did not want to rush you into anything after what you experienced with Damon, and because as king, my choices carry consequences that extend far beyond simple personal happiness. Elena's heart pounded as she waited for him to continue, sensing the significance of whatever he was building toward. But I find myself unable to continue pretending that what has grown between us over these past months is purely professional respect, Kane continued. You arrived at my boundary wall, broken and exhausted, and I watched you rebuild yourself into someone remarkable, not through anyone's rescue, but through your own strength and character. That transformation, and the person you've revealed yourself to be throughout it, has become something I value more deeply than I expected to allow myself. Kane, Elena said softly, her voice trembling slightly with emotion she had not fully allowed herself to acknowledge until this exact moment. I'm not asking for an answer tonight, Kane said gently. I know you've been hurt deeply, and I would never want you to feel pressured into anything before you're genuinely ready. But I wanted you to know clearly where I stand, rather than leaving you to guess at feelings I have not been brave enough to name until now. Elena stepped closer to him, feeling the warmth of his presence, and the honest vulnerability in his admission touch something deep within her chest. I think, she said slowly, choosing her words carefully, that what I felt for Damon was built on comfortable assumptions and childhood promises that never matured into genuine understanding. What I feel when I'm with you feels entirely different. It feels chosen, deliberately, and honestly, rather than simply inherited from circumstance. Kane's expression softened further, hope flickering behind his careful composure. What are you saying, Elena? I'm saying that I don't need more time to know my own feelings, Elena said, meeting his eyes steadily despite the vulnerability of the moment. I've spent months watching you lead this kingdom with integrity, treat me with genuine respect rather than convenient pity, and build something between us based on honesty rather than performance. I don't need to guess at what I feel for you, Kane. I already know. Kane reached out slowly, giving her every opportunity to step back if she wished, and gently cupped her face in his hand, his thumb tracing softly along her cheek. Then may I ask you something important, he said, his voice low and sincere. You may, Elena whispered. Elena Reyes, Kane said, his eyes holding hers with unwavering intensity. Would you consider building a future with me? Not out of obligation, not out of rescue from difficult circumstances, but as an equal partner in leading this kingdom and building a life together, chosen freely by both of us. Elena felt tears gather in her eyes, though these were entirely different from the tears she had refused to shed the night Damon discarded her. These were tears of genuine joy, of recognition that somewhere along this unexpected journey, she had found something infinitely more valuable than what she had lost. Yes, she said softly, then more firmly. Yes, Kane, I would consider that a privilege, not an obligation. Kane's expression broke into a genuine smile, rare and beautiful, transforming his usually guarded features into something warm and unguarded. He leaned down slowly, giving her every chance to close the distance herself, and when their lips finally met, Elena felt the last remnants of Damon's betrayal finally, completely release their grip on her heart. This, she realized as Kane's arms wrapped gently around her, was what genuine partnership felt like. Not the performance of fate that Damon and Marissa had manufactured for political convenience, but the quiet, honest choice of two people who had witnessed each other's true character and decided, freely and deliberately, that they wanted to build something real together. Somewhere in the distance, beyond Ashbourne's protective walls, Blackwood's carefully constructed lie continued crumbling under its own weight. But standing in the garden, with Kane's arms around her, Elena found she cared far less about that unraveling than she once expected to. Her future no longer depended on anything Blackwood had discarded. It depended entirely on the new foundation she and Kane were choosing to build together, one honest moment at a time. News of Elena's growing closeness with Kane Ashbourne eventually reached Blackwood territory, carried through the same trade networks and traveling merchants that had first brought whispers of Marissa's crumbling deception. Elena did not learn of Damon's reaction to this news directly, but Finn brought word a week later that Damon had grown increasingly agitated after hearing rumors that his former promised mate had found favor with a neighboring king known throughout the region for his strength and integrity. "He's been asking questions," Finn reported during a council meeting, glancing briefly at Elena before continuing. "Our contacts say he's been trying to verify whether the rumors about you and King Ashbourne are true, and whether Ashbourne territory might use the connection as leverage against Blackwood's alliance with Thornfield." Elena felt a complicated mixture of emotions at this news. Part of her felt a flicker of vindictive satisfaction, imagining Damon's discomfort at learning she had not simply faded away into obscurity after his rejection, but had instead found genuine happiness and purpose within a kingdom far more powerful than the one that discarded her. But another part of her recognized this reaction as unbecoming of the person she had worked so hard to become over the past months, someone who defined her worth through her own actions rather than through Damon's approval or jealousy. "His concern is understandable, if misguided," Kane observed, his tone carrying the same measured strategic thinking that Elena had come to deeply respect. "Blackwood's alliance with Thornfield is already showing significant cracks internally. If Damon believes Elena's presence here represents some kind of external threat to that alliance, he may act rashly in ways that accelerate his own downfall rather than protecting his position. Should we correct that misunderstanding, or allow it to work in our favor?" Halden asked, looking between Kane and Elena for guidance. Elena considered the question carefully before answering. "I think we should focus on our own priorities, rather than managing Damon's anxieties about my personal life," she said. "This kingdom's strategy shouldn't revolve around his perception of me. If he chooses to act rashly based on incorrect assumptions, that reflects poorly on his judgment, not on anything we've deliberately orchestrated." Kane nodded, clearly pleased with her measured response. "Agreed. We continue our current approach, gathering information and maintaining our defensive preparations along the border, while allowing Blackwood's internal contradictions to unfold naturally." The following weeks brought increasingly dramatic developments from Blackwood territory. Greta's quiet investigation into the legitimacy of Marissa's fated bond had gathered enough testimony from pack members present at the original ceremony that she finally felt confident enough to raise her concerns directly with Damon in a private council meeting. According to reports reaching Ashbourne through various channels, the confrontation had been explosive. Damon reportedly denied all accusations initially, Finn reported during another council session, but Greta presented testimony from at least 6 senior pack members who all confirmed the same troubling observation. Marissa never displayed the physical symptoms typically associated with genuine fated bonds. No shared pain sensations when injured. No enhanced awareness of Damon's location or emotional state. No physical reaction during the bonding ceremony itself beyond what any skilled performer could manufacture. How did Damon respond once he could no longer deny the evidence? Elena asked, genuinely curious despite her emotional distance from the unfolding drama. Our sources suggest he grew defensive and eventually admitted the truth privately to Greta and a small circle of trusted advisors, Finn continued. He claimed he had been pressured into the arrangement by pack elders who believed the political alliance with Thornfield was necessary for Blackwood's long-term security and prosperity. He apparently framed himself as a reluctant participant rather than an active architect of the deception. Elena felt a flash of bitter amusement at this description. That sounds exactly like Damon, she said, always finding a way to position himself as the victim of circumstances rather than accepting responsibility for choices he made freely. The pack has not responded well to this revelation, Finn added. Several senior families who supported his leadership are now questioning whether he possesses the strength of character necessary to lead Blackwood effectively. There's talk of a formal challenge to his position as alpha, something that hasn't happened within Blackwood in over 3 generations. Kane leaned forward with interest. Who would challenge him? Several names have been mentioned, Finn said, including a warrior named Corwin, who apparently served as Daemon's senior guard until recently, when he resigned his position in protest over how the situation was handled. Elena remembered Corwin clearly, the man who had gently escorted her arm the night her title was stripped away, the one small kindness she had received during that entire humiliating ceremony. She felt a small flicker of respect, knowing he had eventually found the courage to stand against the injustice he had once been forced to help enforce. Over the following month, Blackwood's internal political crisis deepened significantly. Marissa, facing mounting scrutiny and the collapse of her carefully constructed deception, eventually fled the territory entirely, returning to Thornfield in what witnesses described as a hasty, humiliating departure that further damaged the credibility of the entire alliance. Alpha Ridgeback, furious at his daughter's failure to maintain the deception long enough to solidify the political arrangement, publicly distanced Thornfield from any further association with Blackwood, effectively ending the alliance that had cost Elena everything just months earlier. Daemon, stripped of both his promised alliance and significant portions of his pack's trust, found himself increasingly isolated as senior families withdrew their support and openly discussed the formal challenge to his leadership that Corwin and others were organizing. The proud confidence Elena remembered from that terrible night in the Great Hall had apparently crumbled entirely, replaced by a desperate scramble to salvage what remained of his authority. Elena learned of these developments with a strange sense of detachment, as if watching events unfold in a story about people she had once known, but no longer fully recognized. She had expected, months earlier, that hearing about Daemon's downfall would bring her deep satisfaction, perhaps even joy. Instead, she found herself feeling something closer to distant sympathy, mixed with quiet relief that she had escaped that collapsing situation before it fully unraveled. "You seem thoughtful tonight," Kane observed during one of their evening walks through the garden, noticing her contemplative expression as reports of Blackwood's crisis continued arriving. "I keep waiting to feel triumphant about everything happening to Daemon," Elena admitted. "The pack elders who erased my mark without hesitation. Greta, who trained me for 3 years and never once tried to defend me. Marissa, who lied so thoroughly to an entire pack. I thought watching their carefully constructed world collapse would feel like justice finally being served. And it doesn't?" Kane asked gently. "It feels distant," Elena said, searching for the right words to describe the complicated emotion, like reading about strangers in a history book, rather than people who once defined my entire existence. "I think that's because my life has moved so far beyond what happened that night. I'm not the same woman who stood on those steps in a gold dress, waiting for Daemon to make me his Luna. I've built something entirely different here, something that doesn't need Daemon's downfall to feel complete." Kane took her hand gently as they walked, his fingers intertwining with hers, in a gesture that had become comfortably familiar over recent weeks. "That's perhaps the greatest victory of all," he said quietly. "Not watching them fall, but simply no longer needing their fall to validate your own worth." Elena smiled, recognizing the deep truth in his words. "When did you become so wise about matters of the heart?" she teased gently. "I had an excellent teacher," Kane replied, squeezing her hand affectionately. "A woman who arrived at my boundary wall during a storm, refusing to beg, despite having every reason to feel broken, and who taught me through her own example that genuine strength comes from refusing to let others define your worth." Elena felt warmth spread through her chest at his words, grateful beyond measure for the unexpected path that had led her from that terrible night in Blackwood's Great Hall to this peaceful garden, walking hand in hand with a king who valued her not, despite her broken circumstances, but because of the strength and character she had revealed while rebuilding herself from those very circumstances. As Blackwood continued its slow, painful unraveling in the distance, Elena found herself increasingly focused not on the past she had escaped, but on the future she and Kane were carefully, deliberately building together, one honest conversation and shared decision at a time. 6 months after Elena first crossed the boundary wall into Ashbourne territory, Kane called a formal council meeting to announce his intention to bond with her, not through any manufactured claim of fate, but through a deliberate, honest choice, made with full transparency before his kingdom's leadership. "I want to be clear about my reasoning," Kane told his assembled advisors, with Elena standing beside him, her chin lifted with the same quiet confidence she had carried since the night they first met. "This is not a political alliance disguised as romance, nor a fated bond claimed for convenience. This is a deliberate choice, made freely, based on months of genuine partnership and mutual respect that I have witnessed grow stronger with each passing challenge we've faced together." Alden, the elder advisor who had served the Ashbourne family for over 2 decades, rose from his seat with a warm smile. "My lord, this council has watched Lady Elena earn her place within this kingdom through consistent integrity and skill. I speak for all of us when I say we could not imagine a more fitting partner for your throne." The other advisors murmured their agreement, and Elena felt tears of genuine joy threaten to spill as she registered the significance of this moment. This was nothing like her rejection at Blackwood, where she had been discarded without a single voice raised in her defense. Here, in this fortress she had once entered as a desperate stranger, an entire council of respected leaders stood ready to celebrate her partnership with their king. "There is one condition I wish to establish clearly before we proceed," Elena said, addressing the council directly, rather than allowing Kane to speak entirely on her behalf. "I will not simply wear a crown as a symbol beside Kane. I intend to continue contributing to this kingdom's governance as an equal partner, offering my knowledge and judgment on matters of diplomacy, healing, and pack law, exactly as I have done these past 6 months. I want that understanding formalized clearly, not left to assumption." Kane turned to her, pride evident in his expression. "That condition was never in question," he said. "I would not want a partner who simply stood beside me silently. I want someone who challenges my thinking, offers perspective I might otherwise miss, and shares genuinely in the responsibility of leading this kingdom. You have already proven yourself capable of exactly that role, Elena, and I intend for our partnership to reflect that reality formally and permanently." The council erupted into genuine applause, a stark contrast to the tense silence that had accompanied her humiliation at Blackwood months earlier. Elena felt the last shadows of that painful memory finally fully dissolve, replaced by genuine warmth and belonging that she had never expected to find again after Damon's public rejection. The bonding ceremony itself, held 3 weeks later, bore little resemblance to the elaborate ceremony Elena had once prepared for at Blackwood. There were no manufactured claims of fate, no desperate performance, designed to convince onlookers of a connection that did not exist. Instead, Elena and Kane stood before their combined communities and simply spoke honest vows, built on genuine partnership rather than childhood promises inherited through circumstance. Elena wore a deep blue gown this time, chosen deliberately to represent the strength and steadiness of Ashbourne territory, rather than the pale gold that had once symbolized promises Damon never intended to keep. Odette had personally overseen the healing quarters preparation for the celebration, ensuring every guest received warm hospitality. Finn stood as one of Kane's chosen witnesses, his easy friendship with Elena over the past months having grown into genuine respect for the woman who had transformed from desperate stranger into trusted advisor, and now future queen. "I choose you, Elena Reyes," Kane said during the ceremony, his voice steady and clear before the assembled crowd. "Not because fate demanded it, not because political convenience required it, but because I have watched your character reveal itself through months of genuine partnership, and I want nothing more than to build our future together, as equals who chose each other deliberately." "I choose you, Kane Ashbourne," Elena replied, her voice carrying the same steady conviction, "because you saw my worth when I believed I had nothing left to offer, and because you have shown me, through countless honest moments, what genuine partnership actually looks like. I do not enter this bond as someone rescued from circumstance, but as someone who has found, freely and deliberately, exactly where I belong." The crowd erupted into celebration as their bond was formally sealed, warm applause and genuine joy filling the courtyard in a way that stood in stark, healing contrast to the cold silence Elena had experienced during her rejection months earlier. She looked out at the faces surrounding her, people who had watched her rebuild herself from nothing into someone whose contributions genuinely mattered to their kingdom, and felt overwhelming gratitude for the unexpected path that had led her to this exact moment. News of the bonding ceremony reached Blackwood territory within days, carried by the same trade networks that had brought word of the growing crisis within Daemon's leadership. According to reports that eventually reached Ashbourne, Daemon received the news poorly, his already fragile authority within Blackwood further undermined by the stark contrast between his own collapsing alliance and Elena's genuine, celebrated partnership with one of the most respected kingdoms in the region. The formal challenge to Daemon's leadership has been officially announced, Finn reported during a council meeting held shortly after Elena and Kane's bonding celebration concluded. Corwin has gathered enough support from senior families to formally contest Daemon's position as Alpha. The challenge will take place within the month, according to traditional pack law. Elena listened to this news with far greater emotional distance than she would have felt 6 months earlier. She no longer needed Daemon's downfall to validate her own worth, having found genuine purpose and partnership entirely separate from anything Blackwood could offer or withhold. But she recognized the significance of the moment nonetheless, understanding that the pack she had once dedicated 3 years of her life to was about to undergo a fundamental transformation. "Do you think Corwin will succeed?" Elena asked, genuinely curious about the fate of a pack that had once been her entire world. "Based on our intelligence, likely yes," Finn answered. "Daemon's support has eroded significantly since the truth about Marissa's fabricated bond became public knowledge. Many senior families feel he prioritized political convenience over honest leadership, exactly the kind of failure that traditionally justifies a formal Alpha challenge." Kane reached for Elena's hand beneath the council table, a small gesture of support that had become natural between them over recent months. "How do you feel about this news?" he asked quietly, giving her space to process her own complicated emotions. "Strange," Elena admitted honestly. "Blackwood was my entire identity for so long. Watching it transform through this crisis feels significant, even though I have no personal stake in the outcome anymore. I think I simply hope that whoever eventually leads that pack does so with more honesty and integrity than Daemon showed during his tenure." "A fair hope," Kane said, squeezing her hand gently. "Regardless of how their internal politics resolve, our kingdom's future no longer depends on Blackwood's choices. We have our own path forward now, built on the foundation we've established together." Elena smiled at his words, recognizing the deep truth within them. Whatever happened to Daemon, to Blackwood, to the pack she had once called home, her future was now firmly rooted in Ashbourne territory, built alongside a partner who valued her genuine contributions rather than convenient political arrangements. The woman who had once stood devastated on those steps in a gold dress had transformed entirely into someone secure in her own worth, someone whose happiness no longer depended on validation from the people who had once discarded her so carelessly. As the council meeting concluded, and Elena walked hand in hand with Kane back toward their private quarters, she allowed herself a final, peaceful reflection on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The storm that had once seemed like the worst night of her life had, in retrospect, simply been the beginning of a path towards something far more genuine and fulfilling than anything she had once believed she wanted with Daemon. She did not know yet exactly how Blackwood's internal crisis would fully resolve, or what role, if any, she might eventually play in witnessing its final chapter. But she knew, with quiet, unshakable certainty, that whatever came next, she would face it as Queen of Ashbourne, standing beside a partner who had seen her true worth from the very first night she arrived, soaked and exhausted, at his boundary wall. The formal challenge to Daemon's leadership took place exactly 1 month after Elena and Kane's bonding celebration, and word of its outcome reached Ashbourne territory within days through Finn's reliable network of contacts. Elena received the news during a quiet afternoon in the healing quarters, where she had been reviewing treatment records alongside Odette when Finn arrived with a carefully folded letter. "Corwin won the challenge decisively," Finn reported, watching Elena's expression carefully as he shared the news. "Daemon has been formally removed from his position as Alpha and stripped of his leadership rights within Blackwood territory. According to our sources, he left the pack entirely within days of his defeat, unwilling to remain and watch someone else lead the pack he once commanded. Elena set down the treatment record she had been reviewing, absorbing this news with a mixture of emotions that surprised her with their complexity. Not triumph exactly, though a small part of her acknowledged the poetic justice in Damon losing everything he had once claimed. Fate demanded he choose over honest commitment. Mostly, she felt a quiet sense of closure, the final chapter of a story that had once defined her entire existence, finally reaching its natural conclusion. What will happen to the pack now? Elena asked, genuinely curious about the fate of the community she had once dedicated years of her life to serving. Corwin has already begun rebuilding trust among the senior families, Finn continued. His first official action as Alpha was formally severing any remaining ties with Thornfield, publicly acknowledging the damage caused by the fabricated bond, and pledging transparency in all future pack decisions. Several sources suggest morale within the pack has improved significantly since his leadership began, particularly among families who felt betrayed by how the entire situation with Marissa was handled. Elena nodded slowly, feeling genuine relief that the pack itself, despite Damon's failures, might find stability and honest leadership under Corwin's guidance. She remembered Corwin's small kindness during her humiliation, the gentle way he had guided her arm when the elders demanded she remove her training mark, and felt glad that his integrity had ultimately been recognized and rewarded by the pack he now led. Has there been any word about Damon himself? Elena asked, curiosity overcoming her initial reluctance to inquire about the man who had once shattered her entire future. Reports suggest he's living as a rogue now, much like you once were forced to when you first fled Blackwood, Finn said carefully. Without pack, without title, without the political alliance he sacrificed everything to secure. Ridgeback and Thornfield have shown no interest in supporting him now that his usefulness to their political ambitions has ended. Elena absorbed this information quietly, recognizing the strange symmetry in Damon experiencing the exact isolation and loss of status he had once inflicted upon her without a second thought. She waited to feel satisfaction at this poetic justice, but instead found herself feeling something closer to distant, almost detached sympathy, understanding perhaps better than anyone else exactly how difficult that particular kind of loss could be to survive. Thank you for bringing me this news, Finn, Elena said finally. I think I needed to know how this chapter concluded, even though my life has moved so far beyond it now. That evening, Elena shared the news with Kane during their usual walk through the fortress gardens, the same peaceful space where he had first confessed his growing feelings for her, many months earlier. Kane listened carefully as she recounted everything Finn had reported, his expression thoughtful throughout. How do you feel, now that it's finally resolved? Kane asked, once she finished sharing the details. Elena considered the question seriously before answering. Relieved mostly, she said. Not because Damon is suffering, though I won't pretend I feel deep sympathy for someone who caused me such profound humiliation without any apparent remorse. I think I'm relieved because this closes a chapter of my life that I've been carrying, even unconsciously, for the past several months. Now I can fully focus on the future we're building here, without any lingering uncertainty about how that old story would eventually conclude. That seems like genuine wisdom, Kane said, reaching for her hand as they continued walking through the garden paths. Many people would have wanted to actively participate in Damon's downfall, to ensure he suffered as thoroughly as possible for what he did to you. You chose instead to simply let justice unfold naturally, focusing your energy on building something positive rather than dwelling on revenge. I learned that lesson from watching you lead this kingdom, Elena said, smiling at him warmly. You taught me that patience and integrity often accomplish more than forced confrontation ever could. Blackwood's own contradictions destroyed that fabricated alliance far more thoroughly than any direct interference from us ever could have managed. They walked together in comfortable silence for several minutes, enjoying the quiet beauty of the evening garden, before Elena spoke again, her tone shifting to something more reflective. I've been thinking lately about everything that's happened since that night in Blackwood's Great Hall, she said. At the time, it felt like the absolute worst moment of my entire life, like everything I had worked toward for 3 years had been destroyed in a single cruel sentence. But looking back now, I realize that moment, as painful as it was, ultimately redirected me towards something far more genuine and fulfilling than I ever would have found if Damon had actually followed through on his promise to bond with me. Do you think you would have been happy with him if things had gone according to plan? Cain asked, genuine curiosity in his voice rather than jealousy or insecurity. Elena considered the question carefully, examining her own past with a clarity that months of distance and genuine happiness had finally made possible. I think I would have been comfortable, she said slowly. But comfortable in the way someone settles for familiar patterns rather than genuinely thriving. I loved Damon in the way you love something you've known your entire life, out of habit and expectation rather than genuine, deliberate choice. What I have with you feels entirely different. It feels like something I chose freely, with full awareness of who you actually are, rather than simply accepting whatever future circumstance handed me. Cain stopped walking and turned to face her fully, his expression soft with genuine affection. I feel exactly the same way, he said quietly. Losing my father so young, inheriting this crown during a crisis, I convinced myself for years that vulnerability and genuine partnership were luxuries I could not afford. You taught me otherwise, Elena. You taught me that genuine strength includes the courage to build real connection, not simply defensive isolation. Elena reached up and gently touched his face, feeling overwhelming gratitude for the unexpected path that had led her to this exact moment. Standing in a peaceful garden with a partner who valued her, not despite her painful past, but because of the genuine strength and character she had revealed, while rebuilding herself from those very circumstances. I love you, Cain, she said softly, the words feeling both new and completely natural as she spoke them for the first time. I love you too, Elena, Cain replied, pulling her close and pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. More than I ever expected to allow myself to feel again, after everything I've carried since my father's death. You've given me back something I thought I had permanently lost. The ability to trust genuine connection, rather than simply managing constant vigilance. As they stood together in the quiet evening garden, Elena felt the final threads of her painful past fully release their hold on her heart. Blackwood's story had reached its natural conclusion, Damon's downfall unfolding exactly as his own choices had guaranteed, without any need for Elena to actively participate in orchestrating his consequences. Her own story, meanwhile, continued unfolding into something far richer and more meaningful than she had ever imagined possible during those desperate, exhausted hours crossing the boundary wall into Ashbourne territory. The woman who had once stood devastated on those steps in a gold dress, watching her entire future collapse in front of 400 witnesses, had transformed completely into someone secure, purposeful, and deeply, genuinely loved. Whatever challenges awaited her and Cain as they continued building their partnership and leading Ashbourne territory together, Elena faced that future with quiet confidence, knowing that her worth had never actually depended on anyone else's validation, only on her own unwavering refusal to let circumstance define her value. A full year passed since Elena first crossed the boundary wall into Ashbourne territory, and the kingdom she had once entered as a desperate stranger had become, in every meaningful sense, entirely her own. She stood now on the same fortress balcony where Cain had once shown her the full extent of the lands she would eventually help govern, watching the sun rise over territory that had transformed her from a discarded promise into a genuinely respected queen. Her days remained full of purpose. She continued working alongside Odette in the healing quarters several mornings each week, refusing to abandon the practical skills that had first earned her a place within this kingdom's trust. She sat as an equal voice within Cain's council, her insights on diplomacy and pack relations having proven valuable enough that even Halden, initially skeptical of any newcomer's judgment, now sought her opinion before finalizing significant decisions. Blackwood, under Corwin's steady leadership, had rebuilt itself into a stable, respected pack once again, its alliance with Thornfield thoroughly severed, and its internal trust gradually restored through months of transparent governance. Elena occasionally received updates through Finn's reliable network, learning that Greta had been formally recognized for her courage in exposing Marissa's deception, eventually earning a respected advisory position within Corwin's new leadership structure. Damon's fate remained uncertain, drifting somewhere on the margins of pack society as a rogue without title or community, though Elena found she rarely thought of him anymore beyond occasional, distant curiosity. He had become, in her memory, less a source of pain, and more simply a lesson she had needed to learn. A painful, but ultimately necessary redirection toward the genuine partnership and purpose she had found at Ashbourne. Marissa, according to the last reports Elena received, had retreated entirely from public pack life, her reputation too damaged by the exposed deception to maintain any meaningful standing within Thornfield or elsewhere. Elena felt no particular satisfaction in this outcome, only a quiet recognition that choices built on deception rarely sustained themselves indefinitely, regardless of how convincingly they were initially performed. "You look thoughtful this morning," Kane said, joining her on the balcony with 2 cups of warm tea, handing one to Elena as he settled beside her, watching the same sunrise she had been admiring. "I was thinking about everything that's happened since I first arrived here," Elena said, accepting the tea gratefully and leaning into his familiar warmth. "It's strange to remember how broken I felt that first night, soaked from the storm, convinced my entire future had been destroyed beyond repair." "And now?" Kane asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer, having witnessed her transformation firsthand throughout their year together. "Now I understand that moment was never actually an ending," Elena said, smiling as she watched the sunlight spread gradually across the fortress grounds below them. "It was simply a difficult beginning to a story I never could have predicted, one far more genuine and fulfilling than anything I would have found if Damon had kept his original promise." Kane wrapped his arm around her shoulders, pulling her closer as they watched the kingdom slowly wake around them, warriors beginning their morning training, healers preparing for another day of tending to their community's needs, the steady rhythm of a place that had become, unmistakably, Elena's true home. "I have news to share," Kane said after a comfortable silence, his tone carrying a hint of excitement he rarely allowed himself to display so openly. "Halden received formal word yesterday that several neighboring territories, having watched how effectively we've maintained stability and integrity throughout the past year, have requested closer diplomatic ties with Ashbourne. They specifically cited your involvement in our council as a significant factor in their confidence regarding our leadership." Elena felt genuine pride at this news, understanding the significance of neighboring kingdoms, specifically recognizing her contributions, rather than simply acknowledging Kane's individual leadership. "That's remarkable," she said, genuinely moved by the acknowledgement. "A year ago, I was a rogue with no pack and no title, uncertain whether I would even survive that storm. Now kingdoms are specifically seeking partnership because of the leadership I helped provide." "You earned that recognition entirely through your own merit," Kane reminded her gently. "I simply gave you the opportunity to prove what was always true about your character and capabilities. Blackwood's loss became Ashbourne's tremendous gain, and I intend to remind you of that fact regularly, in case you ever forget your own worth again." Elena laughed softly, leaning into his embrace with genuine contentment. "I don't think I'll forget again," she said. "Not after everything we've built together this past year. Not after watching this entire kingdom, and now neighboring territories as well, recognize and value exactly what Damon so carelessly discarded." They stood together on the balcony as the sun climbed higher, casting warm golden light across the fortress that had become, through months of genuine partnership and hard-earned trust, unmistakably their shared kingdom to lead and protect. Elena thought back one final time to that terrible night in Blackwood's Great Hall, to the moment Damon raised his hand and said stop, shattering 3 years of promises with a single cruel sentence delivered in front of hundreds of witnesses. That moment, she realized with quiet certainty, had not defined her. It had simply cleared space for the genuine future she was meant to build all along, a future rooted not in inherited promises or convenient political arrangements, but in deliberate choice, mutual respect, and the kind of partnership that grew stronger through honesty rather than performance. She was Elena Reyes, once a discarded promise, now Queen of Ashbourne territory, standing beside a partner who had recognized her true worth from the very first exhausted night she arrived at his boundary wall. Whatever challenges awaited them in the years ahead, whatever political complexities their growing influence might eventually bring, Elena faced that future with complete confidence, knowing beyond any doubt that her value had never depended on anyone else's judgment, only on her own unwavering refusal to let circumstance diminish who she truly was. The storm that had once seemed like the ending of everything she valued had, in truth, simply been the beginning of everything she was always meant to become. And as she stood on that balcony beside Cain, watching their kingdom wake to another day of purpose and partnership, Elena finally, completely understood that some rejections are not endings at all, but redirections toward exactly where a person was always meant to belong.